Hello, my name is Blossums and welcome to another Genshin Impact video, and today we're going to be going over an updated Sucrose build guide video. And I've been trying to make this video for several months, maybe a little bit closer to a year. We'll get into why once we get into the video and the actual build, but just know I've been trying to make this forever, and I'm very excited to bring it to you guys, as Sucrose is one of my more favorite characters starting the game. And since then, she's been kind of replaced by Kazuha, I'm not going to lie, but she's still a phenomenal character. And if you're trying to build her, you're definitely not going to be disappointed. All right, so first off, we need to know a little bit about Sucrose. And well, her kit is all about grouping enemies, debuffing them with elemental resistance through one of her artifact sets, as well as bestowing elemental mastery to your teammates. So not only does she provide good debuffs, she also provides good buffs to the team while grouping enemies so that your team can actually hit them all at once. So she's a valuable teammate to any elemental reaction based team, really. Being able to give that extra elemental mastery to characters is really nice, especially if your artifacts are a little lacking on the elemental mastery side. That can really help boost your damage. And she does this through her elemental skill, which the Astable Anemo Hypostasis Creation 6308. Can't believe I got that first try, by the way. It groups enemies through a little bit of Anemo damage and sucks them all into one little location. Has a cooldown of 15 seconds, which isn't too bad if you have some of her constellations, which we will also go over later, because one of her constellations gives her an extra charge and stuff, and that makes a huge difference. And we'll be talking about all of those in the constellation section. But her elemental burst also pulls in enemies, and this does it over a period of time, albeit the period of time isn't super long. It's long enough to actually group up some enemies pretty substantially, and it also gets elemental absorption, which means if it infuses with another element, hydro, pyro, cryo, or electro, it will take on that element and deal a little bit of additional damage on that elemental type. And that also has an extra tidbit to it through some of our constellations, so we'll go over that as well. These both have some pretty solid scaling. The cooldown on these aren't too bad. High energy cost, so you are going to want some energy recharge, and the additional damage is pretty solid as well. But most of all, honestly, her passives are just as important as her active parts of her kits, especially these two, the Catalyst Conversion and the Molus Favonius here. Basically, whenever Sucrose triggers a swirl reaction, which is going to be all the time in an elemental reaction-based team, it gives the enemies of the matching type 50 elemental mastery for 8 seconds, which is crazy. And then also whenever your E-skill or elemental burst, the Forbidden Creation Isomer 75 type 2, whenever they hit an opponent, it increases all party members, excluding Sucrose's elemental mastery, by an amount equal to 20% of Sucrose's elemental mastery for 8 seconds as well. So you get a whole 8 seconds of some extra elemental mastery, and 50 is a pretty good chunk, but this 20% can get really crazy if you really focus for elemental mastery on Sucrose, which is what you're gonna want to do, because not only do you swirl through all this and deal a bunch of damage via those swirls and some good AoE and grouping, that swirl's damage is increased by elemental mastery, so the more elemental mastery the merrier. And also, just one other thing I wanted to note here is her normal attacks are also pretty solid. They don't really do anything for her kit other than provide some additional swirl if you need to, and if you're really focusing on elemental mastery, these normal attacks are going to help out a bunch, especially in team comps like the Sukokomon team, which I've been using myself quite a bit, and I plan to do a video on at some point. But these normal attacks do come in clutch there, and they're pretty important to the team comp. So just wanted to mention that. Don't entirely ignore these. They are, you don't really need them for the damage that they do themselves, but the swirl they provide is important, and leveling this up isn't going to increase the swirl or anything, but some extra damage on the normal attacks isn't going to hurt if you plan on using them anyway for your own mental reaction based teams. So yeah, Sucrose is really good at debuffing, swirling, grouping up adds, as well as dealing that AoE damage and bestowing elemental mastery to your other teammates. As for the artifact sets here, if you couldn't catch the hints before, yeah, we're going to be using the 4-piece Viridescent Veneer set. This is just going to be the best set on her. You do kind of have some other options. This is definitely the best, and I wouldn't really recommend anything else or Sucrose. But if you just do not have the pieces for your Viridescent Veneer, which I understand, because as I mentioned before, I've been trying to make this video for literal months. Like before Inazuma dropped, I've been trying to get one specific artifact, and that was an Elemental Mastery main stat piece on the Goblet or the Circlet for the Viridescent set, and I could not get either for that long period of time. So I definitely understand not having the set pieces. So if you are looking to use another set because you just cannot get those set pieces, then maybe something like a 2-piece Wanderer's Troop alongside a 2-piece Viridescent Venner, or a 2-piece Wanderer's Troop with the other 4-star artifact set that gives some elemental mastery. I don't have it on me, but I believe there is one that gives some elemental mastery. You could use that as well to, eke out a little bit of extra elemental mastery to try and make up for the fact that you won't be getting the extra swirl damage or the elemental resistance shred from the 4-piece Viridescent Venner. But of course, that still isn't going to be nearly as good as a 4-piece Viridescent Venner. That's just an alternative if you absolutely have to, and I totally understand the need to. When it comes to the main stats, as we mentioned, elemental mastery is going to be the top dog for all of your main stats. Increasing that elemental mastery as much as you can to bestow even more to your teammates is going to be extremely valuable, and not to mention it's also going to increase your swirl damage, which is already being increased by the Viridescent Venner, to just make it deal some pretty insane damage. We'll actually show it off later in the showcase portion that these swirls are no joke, and it's pretty crazy once you get the elemental mastery really going. So yeah, we have elemental mastery on all of our main stat pieces here, and that can be a little bit hard to do. If you get elemental mastery as a main stat on your goblet or circlet, just keep in mind to try and keep it, because it's a little bit more rare than some of the other main stats. Just a little FYI, and that's why this video is taking so long to make, as I mentioned before. But for main stats, of course, you're going to be looking for elemental mastery as much as possible as you can on your flower and your feather. Your sands, goblet, and circlet, of course, it won't be able to get elemental mastery substats because of the fact that the main set's going to be elemental mastery. So you're going to want to focus that as much as possible as you can on your feather and your flower. And then for your other pieces, of course, energy recharge, attack percent are going to be huge. Crit rate and crit damage aren't going to be bad, but they're definitely not necessary, which is pretty nice. Of course, you can get some extra crit rate and crit damage, eke out a little bit of extra damage, but it's not going to be a big deal because your swirl can't crit, and you bestowing elemental mastery on your teammates doesn't really matter if you crit or not, so it's not that big a deal to have it. So I would more so focus on energy recharge and attack percent where you can, and then if you just so happen to get some crit rate and crit damage, then that's pretty nice as well. And before we move on to weapons, I'll briefly go over each and every one of the artifacts I will be using for this video, just so you know how I got to where I got whenever we go over the stats later. So yeah, here we go. As for weapons for Sucrose, it's basically no contest. Sacrificial Fragments is going to be the best on her. It has a high elemental mastery substat there, which is huge for Sucrose, as we went over, but also its passive of being able to potentially restore your skill is huge because it generates more energy, and also you just deal more AoE and grouping and whatnot. It just adds to her whole kit so well. However, if you don't have it, there are other options. Do not fret. They just aren't as good, I will say. Of course, you can use something like the Map of Mare with another elemental mastery substat. Its elemental mastery substat, however, is not as high as something like Sacrificial Fragments, nor does its passive benefit her kit nearly as much, but it's still a pretty decent passive, so this is a pretty good secondary option. Also, something like the Widsith isn't the worst option in the world, and a lot of you might be scratching your heads saying what? But hear me out here for a second. You could build some sort of hybrid version of what we have going on right now, where you try to focus on some crit rate alongside things to deal a little bit of extra normal damage instead of focusing it all in on elemental mastery. And if you don't have something like Sacrificial Fragments, but for whatever reason you do have Widsith, then this is a pretty solid option, because the passive here that gives you elemental mastery does stack with Sucrose's elemental mastery bestowal buff. So if you do happen to get the elemental mastery buff and you get lucky on the Widsith and then you swirl something, then that amount of elemental mastery Sucrose has in that moment will be given to your allies. So that is something you can do. Of course, it still isn't as good as something like Sacrificial Fragments, but this is an option, so I didn't want to entirely exclude it. Of course, something like Hakushin Ring is also an option if you're just going for electro charge reactions or something like that, because then you get a little bit of energy recharge and you're giving an elemental buff for the whole team. But at that point, I think Map of Mare would just kind of be better in my opinion, because you still get some of the elemental mastery. I rest my case basically in saying that Sacrificial Fragments is hand down the best. I wouldn't even put a 5-star over this, just because the elemental mastery that you get from this is so strong, and being able to reset your skill is so strong. Alright, past the weapons and on to the constellations. I mentioned these before, and I did say that these are important because they are, and you'll be happy to know that the most important, at least in my opinion, is her C1 and C2. So the first ones you get are going to be the most important, thankfully, because you get an additional charge for your E skill, which means you're going to be generating more energy and being able to group enemies more efficiently. And then also her C2 increases the duration of her elemental burst by 2 seconds, which is another proc of her elemental burst, because if you don't know, it intermittently does the suck damage, which this allows it to deal 1 more, which is very nice. So these are 2 of the most important ones. So they're very early on, which is fantastic. Of course, C3 increasing the level. C4 is pretty nice, especially in Sucrose, where you are going to be normal attacking anyway. So this is going to allow you to reset your cooldown on your E skill every now and then. For every 7 normal or charge attack hits she scores. Note that does say hit. So if you hit multiple opponents, it's going to count. But do note that it has a cooldown timer there at 0.1 seconds, so if you hit them all at the same time, it may not necessarily count, but this is a nice little quality of life, especially in a Sucrose pairing. And then of course her C5 increases level as well, but the C6 is pretty darn good too. I would say it's as strong as the C1 and C2, where her elemental burst, when it triggers an elemental absorption, all party members gain 20% elemental damage bonus for the corresponding absorbed element during its duration. So that's just an extra 20%, which is nice. This isn't as broken as you might think it is. This is strong, don't get me wrong, but it isn't as necessary or good as C1 and C2 in my opinion. So if you're wondering if you needed to have her C6 to be viable, no, you don't really. I would recommend C1 and C2 though. These are extremely nice quality of life changes and do make her a lot more viable, especially in getting some of that energy. But even these aren't entirely necessary, just something I wanted to point out though. All right, time to briefly go over the attributes of my Sucrose. My Sucrose is at level 80 with 1100 attack and 868 elemental mastery. My crit rate is like 18%, 88 crit damage. As I said, that really doesn't matter. Energy recharge is only 121, which isn't that fantastic. I would definitely like to get this up, preferably I just need better substats, but getting the main stat, as I mentioned before, it took forever already, so I'm just a-okay with this for now. And honestly, I don't have too many energy recharge problems, but definitely still want to increase that. Anemo damage bonus at 33%. That's because that is her hidden passive or hidden ascension passive, so you're getting some by default there. And I do want to note your level is going to matter for Sucrose, because your level does increase your swirl damage. The swirl damage is a reaction that bases itself off of your level as well. So not only your elemental mastery is going to come into play for your swirl damage, but your level does matter too. So trying to get her to 80 or 90 is going to be at least pretty beneficial. 80 is a good stopping point. 90 is if you're just really trying to get out as much damage as possible. But it's not a major increase, but it will increase your damage. Of course, I have her talent levels here at 6, 10, and 10. Definitely need to get these up too, but this is a pretty good spot to be in. Also wanted to mention, this elemental mastery is not the stopping point for Sucrose. I have seen plenty of Sucroses with over 1,000 elemental mastery, so you can really get those numbers up there, and I wanted to mention that for you guys there. But this is a pretty good spot to be in too. All right, and just to demonstrate the importance of Sucrose on these kind of teams, we're going to show a normal Vaporize with Bennett and Tartaglia together, and then we're going to show that same Vaporize when we actually buff Tartaglia with Sucrose here, just so you guys have an idea of how strong that can actually be. Let's go ahead and check the normal Vaporize. You see we did about 65k there, so let's go ahead and redo that Vaporize with Sucrose. All right, so let's go ahead and show off that same Vaporize, but this time with the Sucrose debuff / buff, so it should be a pretty substantial change here, because we're also going to be getting the Viridescent debuff as well as the Elemental Mastery buff. But it's kind of like a, you know, like a double whammy there, right? And then we'll go ahead and swirl. Get the Bennett Pyro applied and Vaporize, and you see we did 116,000 compared to about the 60k that we did earlier. So yeah, that's about double. That's about almost double there. And you can see that the buff is very substantial. Now, do keep in mind, that's not all just the Elemental Mastery buff that Sucrose gives, because Child was at 0 there, and when she actually gives him some Elemental Mastery, we'll actually show you guys real quick. When she gives him some Elemental Mastery, that, you know, goes to 224. and that's a pretty big hike. But that's not all where the damage is coming from. Do keep in mind that the Viridescent Venom is a big contributor there for the elemental shred there. That is a big contributor there, but also that elemental mastery comes into play, and you see he gets about 200 from that, which is huge. A lot of people recommend keeping your top DPSs at around 180 and being able to stop there. So this puts you over that already, which is fantastic, and there's only more room to grow. As I mentioned, you get your elemental mastery to an easy 1000. All right, and to really show off how strong this elemental mastery bestow can be, we're going to use this Kokemon team here, which is Sucrose, Fischl, Kokomi, and Xiangling. Now, I don't play this team optimally, by the way, but you kind of don't need to. Like, there is definitely an optimal rotation for it to have insane damage capabilities, but you can still use it and not do that insane rotation and have good results here. But this team benefits highly from having as much elemental mastery as possible through being able to vaporize, electro charged, and swirl as much as possible, and we're going to be doing that all in this domain. So let's go ahead and do that, and hopefully you guys can see just how strong this could be. I have already messed up the rotation immediately by starting with Xiangling, by the way, but you can see the swirls here and the damage numbers are very crazy, and how that can really start to get out of hand, and the elemental mastery just makes that all so possible from Sucrose here. And I did mention before, you'll see that these swirls here are no joke on the damage. You see our normal attacks here are like 200, 400. Let's go ahead and hit him with Fischl there, and you'll see that our swirls are like 6k or so. And yeah, they can be pretty darn huge, and you really start to benefit from the elemental mastery, especially on a team like this. So I wanted to go ahead and showcase there. We basically deleted the dungeon there if you weren't paying attention. But yeah, this Sucrose can really allow your team to pop off with the elemental mastery that she adds, and I highly recommend her as a unit. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully it was insightful for you to build your Sucrose and why you should do all elemental mastery. It's pretty big, and as I said before, it can take a long time to get those elemental mastery main stat pieces, so if you get them, just keep them just in case, especially if they're Viridescent Venom, as they'll be really good on Sucrose or Kazuha. I plan to have a Kazuha video out as well, because previously I wasn't able to do a full EM Kazuha build either, so I want to compare that to my other Kazuha builds and you know, give my consensus on which one I think is better there. But anyway, yeah, that's gonna be it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it helped you guys out, and if you did enjoy it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as it helps me out a ton and I deeply appreciate it. But other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. My name is Blossums, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.